29 of the LSR Podcast. My name is Matt Brown, joined each and every week by the brightest minds in all of the gaming industry. With me, I have Dustin Gowker. I have Adam Candy. You should follow them on the Twitter machine. It's absolutely free at Dustin Gowker, at Adam Candy, 2 E's, no I. And if you hate yourself, you can follow me at Matt Brown M2. As always, everywhere you find your podcast, we do appreciate any subscriptions, reviews, 5 stars, all the different things like that. Anything to help people find this here podcast. We're going to talk about, of course, we'll do the little state rundown at the end. We'll bring everything home with all the little miniature nuggets that we get. We're going to talk about Arizona. We're going to talk about some numbers that have come out. But first, let's kick things off here with maybe one of the more interesting stories. And we've had a lot of interesting stories over the last 12 months. Let's start off with this PlayUp news that they're suing within the own company here.
Sort of, kind of, right? Former CEO Leila Mintas has been sued by her own company, by PlayUp, with the accusation that she sunk a $450 million, and by the way, peg that number and we'll come back to it, deal that for a sale, at least of some assets, to crypto giant FTX. We could stop there, and that would be an unbelievable story all on its own. Let's just say even the idea of this Australian-listed company selling to a crypto company in the U.S., but it gets even stranger from there. Let's go through the basics here. Leila Mintas had a 2-year contract originally to be the CEO on the U.S. side of PlayUp. According to this lawsuit, and that's pretty much all we have is this lawsuit, she went back in her contract negotiations, asked for her pay to be doubled from $500,000 to $1 million, and also requested to be installed as the global CEO and that the current global CEO, Daniel Simic, be fired. Let that sink in for a minute. When that was not put into her contract, the accusation from PlayUp is that she threatened to, quote, burn PlayUp to the ground, end quote, and worked actively to sabotage the potential sale of PlayUp to FTX. She responded in a statement to us, said, and I want to read this directly because we're talking lawsuits and I want to get it totally right, said, I'm a major shareholder in PlayUp as of today and invested 7 figures of my own savings into the company. It makes no sense that I would have made any of those comments that are quoted in the filing or tried to destroy a deal to sell PlayUp, as I would have benefited from that as well as other shareholders. Over the last 2 years, I built the PlayUp USA business from scratch, having been the U.S. CEO of PlayUp and the only person on the ground for the first year and a half. I built a great team on the ground, got PlayUp US live in Colorado and New Jersey, and got market access in many states, which led to PlayUp USA often being called the sleeping giant in our industry. My hard work has created a valuation of over $400 million alone because of the U.S. market. We will talk about this. We will talk about the idea of PlayUp being worth $400 or $450 million. I have questions. I have skepticism. We will talk about PlayUp being the sleeping giant of the U.S. market because I think there's a lot more emphasis on sleeping than giant when it comes to PlayUp and its imprint or lack thereof in the United States. And I will say that obviously I was at the conference of Legislators from Gaming States conference in Austin earlier this week. This was the talk of the conference. We'll get to a little bit more about that. But, guys, this is one of the more amazing stories that we have seen in 3+ years of legal sports betting in the U.S.
Dustin, look, we're not here to call people out or any of that stuff. But I mean, a quote that where you read stuff about PlayUp being worth $400 million, being the sleeping giant in the industry. I mean, look, we talk about the players on this podcast, what we do. I mean, that's literally what we do. I don't know that we've mentioned PlayUp a single time over the course of this podcast since we've been doing it. So certainly never in the sleeping giant, framed as the sleeping giant in the industry or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we talk about some of the lower tier players. This is a tier below lower tier players in terms of market share right now. Like I said, just 2 states. I have real questions about whether this is worth $450 million. I mean, that's not even. I mean, that's something that's out there. Apparently, according to this, FTX was willing to pay that. I don't know if not. And again, that's like the second or third most interesting is that, like Adam said, it's a major crypto exchange is trying to buy an online gambling company, and that's like almost a footnote to this story because all the lurid details out of the lawsuits. It's wild. Like we could write tomes just about FTX and like what they're getting into. If they're like, are they getting into online gambling? What does crypto mean for? Is crypto really trying to get into online gambling? What does that come along with in terms of regulation? Of like, does crypto want to be a regulated gambling company? I don't know. It's a wild story from top to bottom, and like I think when it dropped, all our heads exploded because it's like all of these things coming together in one thing. And yeah, it would be any one of these stories, like the Mintas stuff, the this company that's a bit player in the U.S. worth $450 million, a crypto exchange buying an online gambling company. These are all massive stories on their own, and they all get smushed into one giant story, and it's fascinating. And we're definitely going to be watching where this lawsuit's going, and and then longer term, is FTX or other crypto exchanges, is this a thing that they're really getting into? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there were a few different things when this broke. I mean, first and foremost, I guess I looked and I go, wow, FTX has $450 million in the first place to go and try to buy something like this. But then I did a little digging, Adam, which I'm sure you did. I mean, you look at this FTX, right? I mean, like they must have multiple billions of dollars that I was just unaware that this company has. I mean, you start to look at the sponsorship deals that they've done. I mean, the Miami Heat arena, over $100 million deal. They did a $10 million deal with the Golden State Warriors. Obviously, Tom Brady pimps FTX. They did a deal with the F1 team, the Mercedes F1 team. Like all of these massive, huge deals that they're doing that are worth millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. So I guess there was just more money involved in that than I thought in the first place, which does kind of start to wonder. I mean, is this just maybe only a matter of time type situation until one of these companies kind of gets really seriously involved in the online gambling space?
I think you're right. I think it is a matter of time until they try to get involved in the online gambling space. The regulated online gambling space is going to be a real question when it comes to that. In fact, that was one of the panels at the Nickel G's conference this week, was talking about the future of cashless gaming and where crypto fits into that. And suffice it to say, there are still major questions with regulators, both at the state and federal level, as to the viability of cryptocurrency being used in sports betting. But I'll tell you anecdotally that what you hear just talking to people around the room is that right now this is a major differentiator between offshore and legal, and it's something that is going to be looked for by a younger set getting involved in sports betting, especially the 20s, 30s kind of crowd. So, and one deal, by the way, Matt, that you didn't even mention in there, which was the first place that I ever had noticed FTX, they had the patches on the umpire's jersey in Major League Baseball, which, I mean, I might be getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but there's a certain amount of legitimacy implied by the arbiters of the sport having FTX on their jerseys. It really is remarkable to think about. Also, we didn't even get into some of the other details in the Mintas story, such as they attempted to serve her multiple times at her home in Henderson. She was not there. A male occupant of the house who said he was there doing a home inspection said that she had already sold the house and was moving to the Bahamas. That's one more aspect of it. This also gave us license to bring back up some accusations that had been involved in Quentin Singleton's departure from BetWorks, in which he accused Layla Mintas and David Wong of running a scheme against him. So, I mean, there are all sorts of angles to this story that have not had a chance to play out yet. It
does not sound like regulated gambling to me when we get all this going. It's also weird, right? Like, it's regulated that this is coming to light. Like, if this is offshore, you would never. But it's a bunch of wild, lurid stories for basically a startup in the online gambling space to be. These headlines are coming out about.
You feel like you should be reading this on 2+2, right? Or like, right. Like it's like on the old poker forums or something like that, where it was just like you'd read all this crazy stuff about these online poker companies or whatever. And it's like, this feels like a story that you'd have read on 2+2 back in the day.
No doubt. It's I mean, again, I read the story and I'm like, I read Brad's story and I'm like, is this really all real? Is this really, am I really reading this in the year 2020 or your Lord 2021?
Yeah.
Like it's a wild story top to bottom, and a couple good stories up on LSR about this, and I'm sure more to come.
Okay, so we love to do numbers here, and one of the things that we really like to talk about are the big numbers that are coming out of the states. And really and truly, we just continue to see these numbers where I don't think we're as shocked anymore whenever they come out, but I think we still go, wow, this is still fairly early on. I mean, I know it feels like to us just because we've been in the mix so long that maybe it's been around forever, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who've been doing it in some way, shape, or form that feel like it's been around forever. But I mean, really, for the vast majority of Americans, this is still a very, very new thing. And to see some of these numbers, guys, Dustin, when we look at Jersey and Indiana and whatnot, it is still pretty shocking, actually.
Yeah, so on this podcast, we are talking a lot about the October numbers. We're now into November numbers. October numbers were inflated mostly because extra weekend of football. Adam and I have been covering just Nevada numbers for a long time, and you could always saw extra weekend of football, way more handle, way more revenue, easy game. Okay, we get to November, not an extra weekend of football. We now are seeing records on either handle or revenue or both in some of the online betting states. New Jersey did not set a record in handle, but set a record in revenue, and almost there on handle. Indiana and Iowa, similar. We're seeing huge numbers in November, which leads you to think, why is this? We're not quite maturity, but we're also not. We're expecting September and October with a lot of football weekends to be kind of the big numbers, right? So what does this lead us to believe? I don't know. I guess we look at basketball and just the ability of the volume of games, the ability to bet in play on games, that people are adopting this more. Again, this is me just speculating, and I'll be curious to hear what Adam thinks on this. But that means, we're seeing, you're getting to the season where there's more games, more basketball, more everything over the winter here in North America, and you're just seeing more betting activity in general, whether there's that extra weekend of football or not. So it's fascinating to me that we're this, and I think it's going to point to the adoption more of just online betting, in-play betting become a bigger thing, and just all those more opportunities to bet on different sports and different games and during the games is probably making a difference. But I'll see what Adam thinks about why we're seeing some November records too.
Yeah, Adam, I mean, I think there's a couple of different things in here. I definitely think the in-play aspect is there. I also think that as the longer people are okay with, the longer people bet, the more that they will start to dabble in other sports as well. Like, I mean, if you came in and you were basically only betting football, year 2 rolls around, maybe you start dabbling a little bit more in NBA and stuff. I mean, kind of how it goes, right? I mean, you never would have bet sport X, Y, or Z, or even considered betting sport X, Y, or Z, but then you get a little bit more comfortable, you start to understand things a little bit more, and then maybe you'll toss a couple of dollars here and there into the other sports as well. I anecdotally, I have friends of mine who have never really bet the NBA before betting the NBA this year. It's just, so I think that there's more familiarity just with betting in general, maybe leads to people branching out a little bit.
I think you probably need to separate this into 2 categories, and that's the general public who are being bombarded with TV ads and have basically seen the cultural acceptance of this and the cultural recognition of this grow exponentially this year alone, in specific this year, but over the past 3 years, right? You see that the ubiquity of sports betting is impossible to ignore. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, awareness needs to be part of the process in terms of the growth of the industry. I'm not breaking any ground by saying that. I think there's another aspect, though, that is worth considering. And, Matt, it goes to what you were just saying about familiarity and comfort. And that is with the big players. That is with folks where you know that DraftKings, FanDuel, MGM, etc., are developing their VIP relationships. And they're working with their whales, and they are probably not only getting them to bet more consistently, potentially at higher stakes, but on more sports, right? Football is the traditional everything. NFL, of course, then college. But what if, when you get someone who is a big player into that regulated space, you can develop their familiarity when it comes to the NBA, when it comes to other sports that are not as traditional of revenue drivers, but that have the same appeal to someone who might not have known about how to bet on those over time, especially if we're going to be talking about MGM, Caesars, and players who are big into casino that they're trying to transition into the sports betting business as well. So there's a lot to consider when it comes to the growth in this. I think the most important piece to keep in mind is that revenue in most of these states is growing alongside handle. And it's not just a matter of we're using more money to churn out the same revenues, right? We're seeing revenue numbers that are records in some of these states as well.
And Dustin, that being said, it's not the case in every single state, because the states that still are operating in the Stone Age, as far as in-person registration and whatnot, that is not actually looking up.
Yeah, some of the littler states or states that either have only retail sports books or monopolies. Oregon, I'm actually coughing too, but with a little bit of a cold. But like we're seeing this, like these states that have this critical mass of operators and everything else, they are doing really well. We did not see a similar, I think DC, Mississippi retail only there. DC retail plus one app. Oregon one app plus some tribal casinos have sports books. Not seeing similar take up. Now it's mostly because you just don't have as much operator, not as much activity. You would see that likely because you have multiple operators trying to vie for this market share. Again, get people used to it. Again, here in Oregon, I can tell you firsthand, especially after being in New Jersey, the app here is just abysmal. And I'm not getting any promos. I'm not getting any push alerts. I have to go look up what I want to bet if I want to bet. In New Jersey, you have the app on your phone, you're active on it, you're getting push alerts, you're getting people telling you, hey, here's this odds boost, here's X, Y, or Z. It's especially when you've already been acquired, you're really getting hammered with that. And if you only have one app or you're running Monopoly, you're not going to see this kind of growth, which I think points to what we've talked about over the years is that great, you're getting more revenue out of having a monopoly, but you're not growing the market and you're limiting yourself.
Absolutely. And I think that's a lesson that hopefully some of these places start to learn through all of this, because it is, you are certainly hamstrung as far as growth goes from that aspect. Adam, we were very, very excited about the launch in Arizona. Still excited about the launch in Arizona. I've talked to a couple of different bookmakers who are live down there who have said they are super excited about what they've seen from Arizona. The only thing is they're seeing that on their end. We're not getting the numbers from the states.
Dustin talked a lot on this podcast about just how fast Arizona was going, and it was. From April with passage and signing by the governor to being ready for the first games of the NFL season, it was one of the fastest launches we had seen. And there hasn't been anything that has gone necessarily wrong in that launch. The books are operating. They, in theory, are making money. We had one report from GeoComply early on that showed the amount of activity. Just basically, are there bets being placed? And it showed that Arizona might already be one of the top 5 markets in the country. What we don't have is the same revenue report that every other state seems to put out without any sort of issue. In fact, we have zero revenue information on what this has generated for the state. We still haven't seen the September report from Arizona. They are now weeks past their original deadline. We continue to ask. Pat Evans has been all over this for LSR, and every time we get what sounds like a wishy-washy kind of response, which is that, well, you have to understand it's a new industry and we're working on it. Guess what? It's been a new industry for every state that has launched. And so why would it be any different right now, right? Why would it be any different for Arizona versus any other state that's trying to figure out how to launch? So we look at it and say, where are your numbers? We don't think there's anything nefarious going on.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of the fact that we're not really knowing anything about the state of Arizona, and it seems that launching this fast, we're seeing the first real consequence of them not being able to have a fully functioning system within that fast launch.
That being said, I am super excited when they do give it to us, because like I said, I had a couple of different people who, at least from their sports book, know kind of what's going on from Arizona, and they were super stoked with what they were seeing from there. So I can't wait to get those numbers when they do finally come out. Dustin, we were talking about Illinois a lot, and we've had some good things to say. We've had some bad things to say, and look, this is let's throw this in the good bucket.
Yeah, so this goes back a while. Illinois passed sports betting quite a while ago, and that law allowed for retail sports books at the Chicago casinos. The only problem was there was a ban on stadium sports books via the Chicago City Council. So just this week, we finally had that lifted, so we can now see team owners and teams have sports books at their actual stadiums. So Wrigley Field, Soldier Field, et cetera, et cetera. All of them can now have sportsbooks at the site. We already know DraftKings had a deal with the Cubs in Wrigley Field going back a ways. There had been some concerns about this raised by the owners of the one casino just outside of Chicago. They didn't want this happening, so they were trying to kibosh that, much with, like they've been trying to stop online registration from being a thing, online registration of not in-person registration. So you will have, it looks like, a DraftKings, a Wrigley, and I'm sure all these other stadiums will have some sort of sportsbook as well whenever they have their deals. But interesting to see that happening. And then we're looking at the new year. Possibly having remote registration, or should be, because of the new law passed just this year about removing in-person registration. We should have that coming off the books sometime here early in 2021. We also have, we talked about numbers earlier. We saw Illinois hit it, despite all of these problems that they've had and making it hard to sign up online. They still hit $840 million in bets in October. They trail a little bit on November, but we see big numbers out of Illinois, big market, and still doing really well, even with these hindrances, which makes you wonder how well it will do once we have remote registration in place.
And Adam, we look here, and Wrigley Field, you understand that there's only 80 home games a year at Wrigley Field or whatever, but like its location just in general, walking distance to so many, so much residential and everything right there, that like you're going to get your bang for the buck opening a sports book at Wrigley Field. You got United Center that has not only the Bulls but the Blackhawks. So now you're getting, it's not only just 80 games a year. Now you're getting 140 something dates a year that are going to be home games mixed between those two teams. And so now you're getting a really good chunk of all that. So I mean, this is not an insignificant thing here that you're able to get these sports books up and going at these stadiums.
No, far from it. I mean, Matt, the very first time I went to Wrigley Field, now still haven't been inside, I only walked around outside, and then walked through Wrigleyville, I was ready to move there. Like, I love the area. It's a great place to be. And you could see where there would be appeal to having a sports book accessible to folks at all times of year with a sports-crazed town like Chicago. So you'll have various options available. Now, this, of course, was not without its challenges in getting done, as Neil Bloom, the owner of Rush Street and the Rivers casinos, put up a pretty big fight because he feels like he has a good track on getting one of the new Chicago casino licenses that's going to be available. And so he didn't necessarily want that competition after previously having tried to partner with the teams, according to Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner of the Chicago White Sox. So this is an interesting story to see how it played out in Chicago, but the council ultimately decided to approve the sports books. And as much as we're not necessarily folks who think that in-person is the way to get people more invested in betting on sports, it's not insignificant at all when it comes to having people in a captive audience who are obviously your most fervent potential bettors.
Absolutely. I'll be interested to see how that goes as well. Like I said, it's certainly just the location of some of these stadiums, the amount of home dates, and especially like at a United Center and things like that. There's some upside to that as well. Adam, some news came out today that you and I just kind of scratch our head over for a couple of different reasons. One, we're scratching our head because more like face palming, because we were pretty excited that maybe we were going to get a new operator here in Nevada, and that does not seem to be the case, at least at this singular sportsbook.
What if I told you that the newest beverage on the shelves in Las Vegas was Crystal Pepsi? Then you might have the same feeling that I have right now, which is a brand that has been killed everywhere else in the country except for Nevada and D.C., William Hill, is going to be the new brand, new in air quotes, at the Palms. The Palms, of course, was under control by Station Casinos. It is now going to be a tribally owned facility, and they've chosen to go with Caesars and William Hill. Now, this is nothing against Caesars. In fact, had you put the Caesars Sportsbook brand there, I probably wouldn't argue with that a whole lot. But you went with William Hill, which is a brand that has no recognition outside of the Nevada market and also doesn't exist most other places now. What advantage is there to going with that for a casino that tried to be owned locally? It obviously didn't work out in that way. Has been struggling to find some sort of footprint ever since the days of filming The Real World there. Like, you need to do something to try to bring people into this place, and I'm trying to speak in a way that's not just about sports bettors.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you just find people, give people a reason to come in. William Hill ain't it. So it's kind of puzzling.
Well, it's puzzling on a couple different reasons. One, because you're allowing one of your competitors right down the street to operate an entity inside your casino, which is pretty interesting from the get-go. But two, like you said, I mean, no diversification whatsoever. I mean, this seemed like a prime opportunity to try and go out and get like some different something to differentiate your property, amongst, like you said, I mean, it's going to become highly competitive. Listen, there are other people moving in. It's no longer just going to be MGM and Caesars up and down the strip. Resorts World is open now. The Mirage just sold to the Hard Rock Group, so we know that they're going to be coming into town. I mean, the Tropicana sold to Bally. So I mean, like there are new people. There's going to be competition coming up and down the strip, and so if you can differentiate yourself in any way, shape, or form, you think you would want to, and instead of either trying it themselves or maybe trying to ram through something with one of these other operators. We know DraftKings and FanDuel have at least applied for gaming licenses and stuff. Like if you'd have tried to ram through something like that, I don't know. I was just pretty disappointed because I was excited that there was going to be some variety there on the strip. But that's not going to be the case at all. And finally, Adam, you just mentioned that you went to a conference earlier this week. I would like to get your thoughts on a couple of different things. I do want to circle back to one of the things you mentioned about the crypto aspect of all of this, because I think the point that they brought up that I have been thinking about as well is just the fact that, look, man, whether you believe in it or not, and whether you're into it or not, the fact of the matter is that 20-somethings are, and they are definitely into all kinds of stuff when it comes to all this, from cryptocurrency to the NFTs to all the different stuff like that. And so that at some point, now the conversation is going to have to be had. Like I said, it might be a difficult one and it might be difficult to get there, but at some point, like a real conversation is going to have to be had, because as you mentioned, the one big, huge now advantage that the offshore markets have lies in that crypto aspect, because they take Bitcoin, they take Ethereum. These guys that have this money that exists and's out there are able to bet and use that, and that does put the market here at a disadvantage.
I'm not sure that I've seen anything in this space, and frankly, anything in the areas that I've covered over my years in journalism, that matches up to the level of misunderstanding or lack of understanding, and I'm including myself in that when it comes to cryptocurrency. Mm-hmm. I think the biggest challenge is the fact that folks our age, and obviously most regulators are at least our age or a little bit older, are trying to get their arms around so many aspects of what cryptocurrency is in the first place, let alone how to regulate it. And that is going to be a major barrier to this getting done in the type of speed that matches everything else that's happened in sports betting, right? Like, you're not going to see it. And it's not just about sports betting. It's about iGaming in general. It's about having the ability to pay at a blackjack table in Bitcoin or another currency, as it is about being able to play sports bets. So, the CFO of Sightline was there and was talking about it, and basically was saying it's a challenge of trying to figure out essentially how you get the money to the casino, how you get the currency to the casino, because I believe the quote was, the vendors don't want to touch it. Like, no vendor wants to hold the risk on cryptocurrency right now because of the volatility in the regulatory space, right? We know that financial markets don't really like instability, and there's nothing quite as unstable at this point as the future of cryptocurrency, whether you believe in it or not. I'm not here to drag the crypto bros. That's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about whether or not this is a viable payment form in the space.
Yeah, no, I'm going to drag any of them. Most of them got a lot more money than I do. That's for sure. That's for sure. Got a lot more money than I do. What are some other some quick takes before we get out of here from you being over there?
Really interesting sports betting panel at the very end of the Nickel G's conference. It's the National Conference of Legislators from Gaming States, a biannual conference. This one was held in Austin, Texas. And what I thought was most interesting was, in the legislative and regulatory space, the Speaker of the House from Colorado, Alec Garnett, was there. And Alec Garnett was one of the primary proponents of legalizing sports betting in Colorado. And he was talking about going back and working on the legislation, working on the regulations, and I think it signals a very interesting shift for people in our space, which is that it's not just about the rush to legalize now. It's not just about, do we make it legal or not? You now have legislators who have a year or 2 or even 3 of evidence and are saying what works, what doesn't, and what changes might we make? And that's sort of the next phase here, right? He talked about the fact that in hindsight, he doesn't think that allowing operators to deduct promo and bonus spending was the right idea. That maybe it makes sense for the acquisition phase, but as we get down the line here, that maybe it is not the greatest idea as we go forward to keep that as part of the regulations. So I think you're going to see a lot of folks taking that same approach, right? Legislators who have been at the forefront of legalizing sports betting are now going to be talking about, well, how do we change our system when it comes to new laws, refined laws, different regulations, etc., in the space. I also have to say that, circling back to where we started with this, there was a fair amount of discussion of this PlayUp and Mintas situation. I will not name names to protect the innocent and the guilty, but let's just say that both the accused and the accuser, there were folks who were not terribly surprised to hear either name involved in the situation. I will leave it at that. I will make it 50-50 and say that no one came out of this story looking good among the participants of the conference.
We're not going to leave you guys high and dry before the new year. I'm actually going to put these guys on the spot, and we're going to do one last one before the end of the year, in which I'm going to get their top 5 stories from 2021. What were the top 5 stories in all of sports gaming, or just in all of the gaming industry in 2021? So we'll have a fun little podcast before the end of the year on that one as well. If you want to follow Adam on the Twitter machine, at Adam Candy, that is 2 E's, no Y. You want to follow Dustin, at Dustin Gallagher. If you hate yourself, you can follow me at Matt Brown M2. For Dustin, for Adam, I'm Matt. Talk to you guys next week.